Hello fabulous DIYers, it's Tobe-Coburn here, and in this video I'm going to show you how to sew this pleated butterfly mermaid gown. So let's begin. So in my last video I took you along with me fabric shopping for fabric for about $10, and I found this floral poly fabric that had this floral design all over it. I got a half a yard of that, and along with it I also got a poly blend sateen fabric that's in 3 yards, that's 60 inches wide as well. I also got a 9-inch zipper, a visible zipper, and I'm going to be using this draping tape that's sticky. It's about 1/4 inch, and this cotton fabric. You can also use muslin if you have that. All information will be down in the description box. So first I decided that I want to do the skirt first, so I'm going to go ahead and cut it out on fabric. Now this pattern I had created it from the geometric dress. If you haven't seen that tutorial, I suggest you go over there to see how I created this pattern. This was from the drape dress pattern, and that video is available for you to view. I will leave the links down in the description box. Now the front of my skirt, I wanted to have a crossover pleat, so I'm going to be using this pattern that I had created for short mini dress that I did, the sequence one. If you remember that, you can also view that as a tutorial. So I have my front pattern, my front dress pattern here, and I'm going to place it over the crossover pleated pattern, paper pattern, as you can see right here, and I'm going to use that as a guide to create the front of my skirt. So like I said, I want my front of my skirt to be a pleated crossover, so I'm going to lay it down onto the fabric and I'm going to freehand this. This has no pattern. I'm just faking the funk and going with what I have. So here I'm cutting the top portion of the pattern, and then I'm going to cut the side away. So this is the shape of the mermaid style. And then I'm going to cut down from the side over to the bottom of the skirt, but I'm going to make sure I bring it inwards and bring it straight down. I know right now looking like it's very curvy, but that's okay. I'm going to continue to go along that curve and kind of bring it straight down, because I see the bottom is very wide. I don't want it that wide because it's going to have a center slit in the front. And then I'm going to cut out the hem of the skirt. So here I'm just going to notch my pleats, so that way I can know or have a guide as where I want my pleats to start, but I'm going to drape it anyway. And I cut 2 pieces out, so we're going to have a layered skirt that's going to be overlapped in the front. So here's the front of the skirt cut out, and this will be ready for pleating when it's time. So I have 2 pieces. So since I already had cut out the back portion of my dress in the beginning of the video, I'm going to go ahead and clean the center back seaming of my dress, of the skirt, excuse me. So here I'm going to go ahead and do a 1/4 inch turn back roll, so that way the whole center back is completely clean, because I want my whole entire skirt to be clean. Since it's not going to have lining, I want the whole entire back to be cleaned. So here it is. I stitched out a 1/4 inch rolled back, and I stitched it down, so this way it looks like on the inside, and it's completely cleaned at the center back seam. And now I'm going to go ahead and install my visible zipper. Now what I like to do is I like to install my zipper when the center back or the pieces are separate, because I like to do it one at a time, so that way the whole back portion of the item or garment I'm going to create is even. So here I'm going to pin it into place, and I'm going to go ahead and stitch it down and then install it. And then after installing the zipper, I'm going to go ahead and close the center back seam. Here it is, the zipper installed and the center back seam sewn in 1/2 inch. Now that the back portion of the skirt is already stitched and closed, now it's time for me to go ahead and connect the front to the back of the skirt at the side seam. So here I'm just going to pin them together, and I'm going to create a French seam. Now if you don't know how to create a French seam, for the beginners who are watching this video, I would recommend you to go look at my other tutorials, like my lace tutorials, where I show how to create a French seam to clean up the seaming when you don't use the overlock machine or a zigzag stitch to clean up your seam allowance. But you can also search this on YouTube. I'm pretty sure there's videos that you can find to create a French seam. So here I'm going to go ahead and do that. And as you can see, it's all completely cleaned on the inside. And this will not cause any fraying. The same finishes that I did at the center back, I'm going to do it at the front edge of the skirt. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and create a 1/4 of an inch roll back finish, so I can finish the edge of the front of the skirt. And here you can see that, and now it's ready to be draped and pleated. So I'm going to be pleating the waistline of the skirt. So now I'm taking my skirt to the dress form and placing it onto the waistline. Now, as you can see, the skirt is bigger than the dress form, and that's because it's my size, but the waistline of the dress form is the same size as my natural waist. So I'm going to use that as a guide. So I'm going to pin the side seam at the side seam, and then I'm going to start pleating the front of my skirt. So here at the front edge of the skirt, I'm going to go and fold that in because I don't want it to look like it's undone or something, and then start pleating it onto the waist. As you can see, I placed the longer part of the skirt onto one side of the princess seam, and I'm going to start pleating at the waistline. So here I just added like 2 pleats, and I just shaped it diagonally so that way I can create the shape that I want. And I'm just going to go ahead and just perfect it and shape it the way I like it on the waistline only. So here I'm going to go back and adjust the front of the skirt, making sure that I turn inward the edge of the skirt so that way it can look like it's more finished and purposely meant to be that way, and then pin into place. Once I have the pleat pinned in place and I like the way it looks, I'm going to go ahead and overlap the other side of the skirt onto those pleats so that way I can create my crossover. As you can see, I brought the front edge over to the princess seam and started pleating it over on top of the other pleats. So now, once I've decided that the pleats are fine, I like the way it looks, I'm going to go ahead and cut some of that excess fabric at the top of my pleats. I'm going to cut it to the waist tape so that way I have my seam allowance. When it's time for me to install, I don't need to worry about that point. Then once I've done that, I'm going to go ahead and base stitch the pleats in place. Now I did the same thing to the $20 gown. If you remembered or watched that video, you remember that I did the same type of technique to when I created the pleated skirt portion of the gown. And to create the base stitch or the stitching, it's just needle and thread, and you're just going to be doing a loose stitch just to secure the pleats into place. Once I've done that, it looked like this when I finished it. And now I'm going to go ahead and create a facing. This is what the facing looked like after I created it. And all I did was take a piece of pattern paper, and as you can see, the facing is cleaned on the inside with a French seam. I did overlock stitch the edge of the facing and turned it back 1/4 of an inch, but that was just me deciding to do that, but you can do it any way you want. And the way I created my facing was I copied the front portion of the waistline of the skirt, and then I went ahead and perfected, added a 1/2 inch seam allowance at the side seam, and just went ahead and just perfect the facing, and then recopied it onto a second piece of paper and drew in the back portion, which was more straighter, and I just cut it out. Added a 1/2 inch at the center back just to accommodate when it's time for me to place it and install it. And this is what the facing looked like, the patterns pieces. And once I have the pattern pieces done, I just go ahead and cut it on the self fabric on the wrong side. So now I'm going to be using this cotton fabric. If you have muslin, you can use muslin, and I'm going to go ahead and drape the front portion of my bodice. Now using the draping tape, I'm going to go ahead and drape the design that I want. And I want it to kind of have a butterfly silhouette shape with a cutout at the center of the abdomen area. So here I'm placing my tape, shaping it the way I want it, my neckline to be. And I want it to kind of look like a sweetheart-ish type of style at the front, so I kind of curved it upwards and place my tape there. And then I also tape the bottom portion of the abdomen area where I'm going to be creating my cutout. Now from the side seam, I decided that I wanted to bring from the neckline all the way down to the back and create a halter shape type of style. So I'm going to tape it into position, making sure this is how I want it, and then I'm just going to cut away and adjust it however I like it. So here's the shape of the bodice that I want to create. So once I've got that down, I'm going to go ahead and pin the cotton fabric onto the center front line of my dress form. So here I'm going to pin into place and start smoothing it out, and then start draping it into place. So I'm going to drape the front portion of the bodice first. I'm going to add a bust dart. So here I'm going to pin the dart into place, making sure that it's completely pinned and shaped right. So I'm going to adjust that and take my time in shaping the bodice. And then here I wanted to make sure that it's smooth around the waistline and side seam and get all that buckling out. So I'm going to slash into the waistline, not into the waist mark tape, but enough to allow me to ease some of that fabric in that area, because I want the fabric to kind of smooth out a bit. I'm going to take my dart all the way down to the waistline and cut away some of that fabric, and then continue to slash and pull so that way I can get the fabric to be much neater around the waistline. So now once I have gotten the shape of the bodice, I'm going to go ahead and trace the mark of the taping around the neckline so I can get the neckline shape and bodice shape. So here I'm marking the front, and then I'm going to take it back to the side seam and then mark in the side seam. Then I'm going to mark the waistline where I want to create my cutout, mark my dart, the front and back side of the dart, and then continue down to the waistline. So this is the shape of my bodice. And then I'm going to remove that part and drape the back portion of the bodice. So once again, I'm going to place my piece of fabric, cotton fabric, against the center front line, and then smooth everything out to shape it. If I need to slash, I'm going to go ahead and slash that to make sure that I can ease the fabric into that shape. Pin it to place, and then start marking the shape of that back bodice. So I'm going to mark the side seam, the waistline, and the back neckline. Once I've done draping, I'm going to go ahead and just adjust my side seams and my lines and add in a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So at the bottom of the waistline, I did not add a 1/2 inch because of the waist tape. I'm going to perfect the side seam, and then add my 1/2 inch seam allowance to the front bodice. Also fix the neckline and add my 1/2 inch seam allowance to that too as well. And adjust my darts. As you can see here, I'm just going to adjust my dart and then repin everything back together again. Now that I have everything pinned back, I'm going to go ahead and cut everything out. And then do the same thing once again for the back portion of the bodice. So here I want to curve in my center back neckline and then make my adjustments, and then add the 1/2 inch at the side seam and seam allowance, and then connect the back portion to the front portion of the bodice. So here it is pinned, and I'm going to look if everything is okay, if I like the fit, and if I don't, if I see any flaws like right here at the armhole, I'm going to go ahead and just adjust that and tighten that up because it's cut on the bias, so there's a bit stretch at the bias. But this will also might change as well when I transfer it onto the fabric, because every fabric acts differently against the bias. So here I'm just going to pin and adjust and fix, and I'm going to make my corrections, and this is what I want it to look. Here in the front as well, I saw a little bit ease there, so I'm going to just tighten that up. And then now I'm going to go ahead and measure my strap length, where I want it to end, how long it is, and where I want to place the strap. So as my strap is about 19 inches and I want it to be kind of low at the back, so I'm going to place a mark where I want my strap to be when it's time for me to install. So here I'm just going to press out the bodice with the dart in place, and then I'm going to transfer it onto paper. But here I'm going to make my corrections before I transfer it, because I decided that I wanted to have no side seam at my bodice. So I'm going to keep that side seam pinned into position, and then I'm going to go ahead and adjust the center back neckline from the neck to the front. And then I'm going to cut off the 1/2 inch. I just like doing this because that way I know that I can put it in, I can perfect that seam, and then put it back in when it's time for me to create my paper pattern. Now, I noticed that a lot of people ask me, why don't I go directly with the muslin and cut it onto my fabric? And if I do that and my muslin is not correct and I don't put it on paper, if I cut it with a mistake, I lose my fabric. So I'm not a pro like that, but if you are a person who can get things accurate the first time, more power to you. Go ahead and cut it on your fabric. That's your skill. But I'm not good in that area, so I gotta go put it on paper to make sure my pattern pieces is correct, because I'm not wasting any fabric. So here I went ahead and cut out my pattern just to test it again. And once again, I'm going to go take a look, and this is what it looks like. I kind of like the shape and fit, but I can see that there's a little bit more ease at the bias. So I'm going to take that in just a bit again and add those adjustments onto paper to perfect the pattern. So here I tighten it up, and then now I'm going to go ahead and transfer it onto paper and copy the whole entire pattern all over again. Now once I have that done, I'm going to go ahead and cut it out on the self fabric, and this is the floral fabric, and I'm going to pin it together, and I'm going to stitch the dart down, and here I am stitching it down. And then now I have 2 pieces. Now what I'm going to do is, before I go ahead and stitch that down, I'm going to go ahead and just pin it so I can see the fit on the dress form. And here it is, and I like the way it fits. I decided to come in a little bit further on the cutout at the waist and add seam allowance, so it's a little bit less wide as it was in the beginning. And once I like that, I'm going to go ahead and cut it out on the fabric lining. So here it is on the fabric lining, and I'm going to test it. And as you can see, it acted differently because the fabric is much stretchier on the bias when I cut. So I went ahead and just added a little dart there just to close it. I'm not going to cut it out on my scraps of fabric because I don't have enough for what I want to do. So therefore I'm going to go ahead and just sew down these darts. So here's the darts sewn now in place, and it looks good. And now I'm going to go ahead and create my straps from the scraps. And here I'm just using my 2-inch ruler to create 1-inch straps that's going to be folded in half. So here I'm going to press it into place to help me create my straps. I'm going to fold it again inwards so that way I can clean it up to create a 1/4 inch straps, and this is what it looks like. Now I'm going to create the pleats for the butterfly piece at the center front of the bodice. So here I'm going to cut out this square-ish angular rectangle, which is 10 at the top, 11 inches long at the side, and 5 inches at the bottom wide. And I'm going to cut 2 pieces, and I'm going to cut another 2 rectangular shapes. Now I'm going to clean it up by doing a 1/4 inch roll back at the top edge of these squares that I'm showing you right here. This is where I'm going to be creating my finishes. So here it is, as you can see, it's finished, and it kind of looks like a triangle point, and the bottom edge is raw and the side edges is raw. This is going to be connected to the bottom portion of the top portion of that. Now I'm going to go ahead and connect it and create a French seam because I want it to be cleaned. And this is the whole entire piece that I'm going to be using to create the butterfly effect. So here, as you can see, it's all cleaned inside and out because I don't want nothing to fray. And I have 2 pieces that's going to be on each side. So now it's time for me to pleat. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pleat it about a 1/4 inch. No, I'm going to pleat it about 3/8 of an inch downwards and press. So here I'm taking a piece of muslin fabric and placing it on top of the pleat and pressing it. So I'm just going to hold it down for a couple of seconds, pleat that, press it down nicely, and then continue once again. And I'm going to continue this pleating effect all the way to the top edge of the portion of that pattern piece. Now once I'm done with that, it looks like this, and I want to repeat the whole process again for the other side. So now I have 2 pieces pleated, which looks like the wings, and now I'm going to place that pleated portion onto the middle part of the front portion of the bodice. So I want to leave about 3/8 of an inch away from the edge, so that way when I install my lining I have room. So I'm going to angle this a little bit because I'm going to eventually extend it and stretch it out just to flare it a little bit to give it that butterfly effect. So I'm just going to place it and try to fit it in the center, in the middle of where I want it to begin and end. So here it is on one side positioned. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side as well, making sure that it's where it needs to be on an angle. And then I'm going to go ahead and flip that onto the other side of the bodice, so I can stitch it down a 1/2 inch seam allowance at the center front. So here at the center front, I'm going to just go ahead and adjust that, making sure that the pleats are in place. And then I'm going to sew a 1/2 inch at the center front, making sure that I leave about 3/8 of an inch off the top. So I'm going to come in 3/8 of an inch and then sew a 1/2 inch. And here it is. And I'm going to cut away that excess fabric that's at the center front. And then I'm going to open it up. And there we go. Voila. Look, you see the butterfly effect happening right now. Super cute. Yes. I'm loving it. You see? And that extension, like I said before, I'm leaving about 3/8 of an inch. So when it's time for me to install the lining. So here's the lining now. But before I install it, I'm going to go ahead and get my straps ready to install that too. So here's my strap. And I'm going to take that and place it at the tip seam allowance of the neckline. I'm going to make sure that it's straight down and then lay the lining right on top and pin that into place so that way it doesn't move. Then at the center front, where it's 3/8 of an inch at the neckline, I'm going to go ahead and connect that to the front portion of the bodice. So here I'm going to go ahead and sew that first so that I can stitch that down into place. It's also going to include the strap to be stitched in place as well. So I'm going to go and start from that point all the way to the strap point. Here it is stitched, and now I'm going to go ahead and place the back of the strap down to the notch area where I wanted the strap to end at the back. And then now place that lining right on top and then pin that to stitch it down. So here it is pinned. I'm going to stitch it a 1/2 inch at the edge. So now that it's stitched in place, now it's time for me to go ahead and stitch the stomach area of the bodice. So here I'm going to stitch that part, and it's going to leave open the bottom waist of the bodice. So I'm going to sew a 1/2 inch once again. And that part is sewn closed. So everything is sewn closed, and as you can see, the bottom of the bodice is open, and I'm going to repeat the same process all over again for the other side. So here it is done, and I'm going to flip it inside. So it's going to pass through the center front of the bodice. And here it is all flipped inside and out. And as you can see, the center front looked like a butterfly. And now I'm going to go ahead. This is the back side of the bodice. I'm going to go ahead and press it. And I'm going to go and place it on my dress form just to see how it looks. And this is how I'm going to fan it out. I'm going to go ahead and play with it to see where I want it to be placed and how I want it to look. And once I've decided that, I'm going to pin it into position. So that way I know that this is where I need to tack it down. Okay, so this is what it looks like. I am satisfied. And now it's time for me to install the bodice against the skirt. So here I'm going to go ahead and just pin the waistline to the waistline of the skirt, and at the edge is going to meet at the zipper, and here it is pinned into place. And then I'm going to overlap on top of, I'm going to place on top the facing of the fabric to clean the seam allowance on the inside. Now that it's cleaned, it is folded. I'm going to sew a top stitch 1/8 of an inch from the edge so that way it doesn't turn and flip on the outside. I wanted to make sure it stays down, and then I'm going to stitch down the side edge of the facing onto the zipper so that way it doesn't flip upwards. And then it will look like this. I did a 3/8 of an inch turn back at the hem to finish my hem finish of the skirt. And once I was done with that, my gown was ready to wear. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you liked it, let me know down in the comments, hit that like button and subscribe for more videos like this, because I am continuing with the series. The next one I want to do is $5, so we're going to have fun with that. So I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye guys.